Chapter 47. What was Een Sha? When the Een energy in a ghost's body reached a certain level, it would turn into Een Sha. Although the Een Sha in the waist compass was formed by death chi and chi, it was essentially the same thing. Other geomancy masters had to guide their chi into the compass to neutralize the Een Sha. However, I didn't need to do that because I had Tong. When Tong had just died and turned into a ghost, she was very weak. Chun Tingting's ghost had always coveted her, but in the end, Chun Tingting's ghost didn't dare to swallow her. The reason was that Tong was a heavenly fetus with 3 souls. She was the nemesis of ghosts. No matter how weak Tong was or how strong the other ghosts were, as long as Tong wanted to, she could swallow any ghost effortlessly. This was the most domineering ability of a heavenly fetus with 3 souls. In other words, the ghosts that other geomancy masters raised could only become Tong's food as long as they hadn't reached the Een spirit realm. It was a kind of suppression. If she could swallow ghosts, she could also swallow Een Sha. However, the waist compass had a snake spirit, so Tong couldn't swallow Een Sha directly. She needed to slowly grind it down. However, it was much faster than using the geomancy master's chi to grind it down. Magic tools needed to be nourished by the geomancy master's dragon seeking and acupoint sealing. Dragon seeking was to give the magic tool a spirit, and acupoint sealing was to let the dragon energy wash the tool and open its spirit. Once the Een Sha was eliminated, the waist compass would transform into a real magic tool, since the snake spirit was a creature with intellect. After returning to the hotel, I called Tong Tong and told her about the situation. Tong didn't look happy because I had asked her to swallow Een Sha. However, when she heard that there was a snake spirit inside, her big, round eyes brightened. She immediately hugged the compass. I didn't know what Tong had done, but the compass suddenly emitted black smoke. A massive shadow as thick as a thigh emerged. It was the snake spirit inside the compass. As soon as it appeared, the serpent spirit quickly circled around the room and let out an extremely sharp laughter that made one's scalp tingle. After a while, it stopped and swept its fierce triangular eyes around before staring at me. "You little brat, I originally planned to come out at night to slaughter you and swallow your Dao Qi. I didn't think that you would be so anxious to die, and even found a little spirit to vainly try to swallow your snake immortal. Aren't you afraid that the wind will cut your tongue? This is simply infuriating." The spirit snake muttered for a long time. In the end, it raised its eyes and glanced at Tong Tong and me. It concluded, "All right, prepare to die." Then he turned into a gust of black wind and stormed toward me. Magic tools are things that I can't even come into contact with right now, and this snake spirit can become the tool's spirit of a magic tool. So its strength is quite extraordinary. If I didn't have my eyes and rashly brought it back, I'm afraid that in the end, I would really end up being killed by it and devoured of my Dao Qi. Unfortunately, I had Tong Tong. I looked at the talkative spirit snake with pity. This fellow had been trapped in the compass for many years. It wasn't easy for someone to dig it out from the ground. If it had been in the hands of an ordinary person, it wouldn't have been able to come out without Dao Qi or Een Qi. Now that it had finally come out, it was unfortunate that it had met Tong Tong again. What was even more unfortunate was that it didn't know that Tong Tong was a heavenly fetus Een spirit. As I watched it pounce on me, I didn't do anything. Soon, I heard Tong Tong's voice. "You little snake, you don't know your manners." Tong Tong reached out and grabbed the tail of the giant spirit snake from the gust of black wind. She gently swung the spirit snake to the ground. Then she wrinkled her nose and angrily said, "You're not allowed to talk to your brother like that again." The spirit snake was thrown to the ground. Its 2 triangular eyes were a little dull. It didn't understand why a weak Een spirit, like a little girl, had pulled it back. When it was a spirit snake, it was very strong, let alone Tong Tong, and even Professor Deng, would have a hard time dealing with it. But now it had lost its body and was residing in the compass. It wasn't much different from the other Een spirits. How could it be Tong Tong's opponent? After a long time, it jumped up from the ground. It stuck out its tongue and roared, You dared to grab my tail." Before the spirit snake could finish its words, Tong Tong angrily opened her mouth. She looked even angrier than the spirit snake. She pouted and said, You dared to curse." Thud! Tong Tong grabbed the spirit snake's tail and swung it again. It fell from the sky and fell to the ground. This time, the snake spirit was completely dumbfounded. The gloomy expression in its triangular eyes disappeared. Instead, it revealed a somewhat aggrieved expression. It was like a little wife who had been abandoned. It was very resentful. Tong Tong might have felt a little sorry for it. So it hopped over to its side, reached out and patted its huge head, comforting it. "All right, little snake, don't make me angry, and don't say dirty words again. I won't hit you, okay?" I seemed to see the spirit snake's entire body tremble. It seemed to be a little scared, but it was more angry. It still had the demeanor of an overlord from when it was still alive. It couldn't lower its noble head. Hiss, it spat out its tongue frantically and leaped into the air from the ground. A small bump suddenly appeared on its huge head. Then, its entire body arched from the back of its tail, and a thick black gas gushed out from its bloody mouth. It surged towards Tong Tong and completely enveloped Tong Tong's small body. After doing all this, the spirit snake's body shrunk. It seemed to be much weaker, but its spirit was very excited. It laughed loudly. "Ha ha, you don't know life from death. You dared to attack your uncle's snake, Immortal. If I don't show my power, do you really think I can't do anything to you?" I was a little worried as I looked at Tong Tong, who was shrouded in black gas. The scene of the spirit snake had shocked me. From the small bump on its head, this spirit snake wasn't simple when it was alive. I was afraid it had reached the stage of transforming into a flood dragon. I guessed its death wasn't an accident, but a failure to transform into a flood dragon. Although it had failed, there was a bump on its head. It had also comprehended some of the flood dragon's supernatural powers. That black gas was probably the flood dragon's flame. No wonder it was so angry. If it had successfully transformed into a flood dragon, it would have become a flood dragon with a wisp of true dragon's aura. It would have been in existence close to the heavenly master of geomancy. Even if it had died, it would have become a Een spirit, and not a Een spirit. This kind of spirit snake had lived for more than 1,000 years. It was definitely an overlord in the forest when it was alive. It had never suffered like this before. Unfortunately, it hadn't succeeded in transforming into a flood dragon. Soon, the black gas dispersed. Tong Tong's snow-white hand reached out from the black gas. Her face was tense, and her mouth was bulging. She stood next to the spirit snake's head. I didn't know how she had managed to grab the spirit snake's tail. All he heard was a series of banging sounds, interspersed with Tong Tong's angry voice, one word at a time. "You still dare to speak dirty words." After each sentence, the spirit snake was thrown to the ground. After 8 times, Tong Tong finally released her hand. This time, the spirit snake lay on the ground. Its 2 big, triangular eyes were no longer angry. There was only endless bewilderment. The desolate spirit snake's head had an expression that said, "I'm tired. I feel that living is meaningless." Tong Tong rubbed her little hands and still had a cute, angry look. She walked over and leaned on my arm and said with grievance, "Gidge, the little snake is too bad. I already told him not to swear, but he just won't listen. I don't want to educate him anymore. I glanced at the spirit snake, who was lying on the ground. It looked as if a dozen men had dragged her into the forest and raped her for several hours. Then I turned to look at Tong Tong, who was leaning on my arm. I didn't know why, but I felt a little embarrassed. I rubbed Tong Tong's head and said, embarrassedly, "This little snake doesn't know anything." Chapter 48. After complaining to me for a long time, Tong Tong reluctantly accepted the task. Since the compass was a real object and the Een spirits were attached to the compass, Tong Tong couldn't bring the Een spirits back to the jade bracelet when she swallowed them. She had to leave them outside. These days, Tong Tong stayed with me in the room. During the day, I studied the ways to use the Luo Sutra recorded in the Death Scripture, and Tong Tong slowly eliminated the Yin energy. At night, Tong Tong hugged her legs and sat on the bed, listening to my stories. Since she was born, Tong Tong had lived in a world of her own. Her heart was pure, but she didn't know much about this world. Sometimes I told her my experiences, and sometimes I told her stories that I had read in books. No matter how wonderful my experiences or stories were, Tong Tong listened carefully. She wore a smile on her small face, as she felt that it was interesting. At first, I thought that Tong Tong was like my little sister, and I couldn't help but want to protect her. But now, I felt that she was more like my daughter. I didn't have the experience of being a parent, but Tong Tong acted like a spoiled child. Sometimes, she pestered me to tell her stories. She was considerate, just like a warm, cotton-padded jacket. One time, I went out during the day. When I came back at night, I saw Tong Tong lying on the table in the hotel. She puffed her small mouth and blew on the table. I felt strange, so I asked her, "What are you doing?" Tong Tong wrinkled her nose. "There's a lot of dust on the table. She wants to clean it." I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. Tong Tong didn't know how to wipe the tablecloth, but she had the heart to do it. This was the best part of her. I taught Tong Tong how to wipe the tablecloth, broom, and mop. Tong Tong seemed to have discovered a new world. Every day, she would happily clean the room. Every morning, the auntie who came to clean the room sighed with emotion. She has been cleaning the hotel for more than 10 years, but she has never seen a guest like me who loves cleanliness. Tong Tong was happy, but the serpent spirit's life could only be described with one word: miserable. Every day, when his eyes devoured the Een Sha in the compass, because the snake spirit and the Een Sha had already fused into one, he had to slowly extract the Een Sha from the snake spirit's spirit body. This feeling was like picking off a person's flesh bit by bit, and it was extremely painful. Therefore, every time the inspector was extracted, the serpent spirit would howl in pain. Its huge body kept rolling and grinding. That scene would make anyone who saw it cry. Of course, ordinary people couldn't hear it. Only Tong Tong, and I could hear it. However, I wasn't harming the serpent spirit. With its current appearance, it could only be considered a Een spirit at best. Moreover, when it was too far away, it would die and vanish. Of course, it was just a theory. In reality, it was almost impossible to achieve. It was just like how people couldn't suffocate themselves. The pitiful serpent spirit had chosen the most difficult way to commit suicide to get rid of Tong Tong, the great demon king. I sadly watched the serpent spirit open the door. It endured the great pain and struggled to move out of the room. I was deeply moved by its behavior. I gently patted the jade bracelet and called, "Tong Tong. Hey, little serpent, where are you going?" As soon as Tong Tong came out, he saw the serpent spirit. He smiled and shouted at him. The serpent spirit, who was carefully crawling out of the room, was shaken. After a few seconds, the snake spirit turned its head and quickly returned to Tong Tong's side. With a flattering look, it said cheerfully, This little baby has to go out every morning, so I went to open the door for him. As soon as it finished talking, Tong Tong slapped its head and scolded, "How many times have I taught you? You have to call him Big Brother. Don't call him a child. Go and call him Big Brother." The serpent spirit's flattering smile froze on its face. It struggled to turn its head and look at me. It looked as if it had eaten 10,000 flies. It lowered its head in humiliation and softly said, "Big Brother." Tong Tong patted the serpent spirit's head in satisfaction and returned to the jade bracelet. After staying in the hotel for about half a month, the gloomy specter in the compass was finally reduced by more than half under Tong Tong's daily efforts. The last trace of gloomy specter could not be completely eliminated in a short period of time. I could only carry it with me and slowly nourish it with my chi of Tao. At this time, Chief Lu finally contacted me. He told me that he had prepared everything. He asked me to go to his company tomorrow morning to discuss the trip. The next day, I went to Chief Lu's office and chatted for a while. Chief Lu told me that he had found some people to help him with this trip. He asked me to go with him to meet them. We left the office and went to a small meeting room next door. There was an old Taoist priest with gray hair, 2 middle-aged men, a chubby young man, and a pretty girl. At this moment, the old Taoist priest and the 2 middle-aged men were sitting on chairs with their eyes closed. The chubby young man had his back to me and was talking to the young girl. It seemed they were quarreling. After we entered the room, the other 3 opened their eyes and looked at me. However, the chubby young man didn't seem to hear us and continued to quarrel with the girl. However, that young girl had a very impatient expression and directly stood up and walked towards Chief Lu and me. The plump young man finally stopped talking and turned his head. When I saw his face, I dropped my jaw. Isn't that the fatty? Since Kaifeng was an ancient city, the Taoist Association would be even stronger. I didn't dare to neglect the president of the Kaifeng Taoist Association. However, this Zhao Yongquan's expression was a little arrogant. There wasn't much expression on his face. He only nodded at me indifferently as a greeting. He didn't even say a word. I didn't mind. It was normal for a powerful old Taoist to have an eccentric temper. It would be strange if he was friendly with me. Finally, Chief Lu introduced the 2 sturdy middle-aged men. He said that they were from a security company and that they had a group of retired Special Forces soldiers. They would be responsible for our safety. After introducing us to each other, Mr. Lu gave us Bai Ling's contact information. He told us that if we needed anything, we could contact Bai Ling within the next 2 days. After that, Chief Lu asked the fatty with a smile, "I wonder if Master Lin can perform a divination and set a suitable time for our trip?" The fatty shook his head. Divination is about fate. How can you predict the good or bad luck of the trip? You should ask him. Feng Shui masters are good at choosing auspicious days. Then he pointed at me. Chief Lu looked at me with a smile. I shook my head helplessly. Whether or not it's suitable for the trip is already fixed in the lunar calendar. There's no need to calculate anything. Tomorrow is the 9th day of the Lunar New Year. How about we set it tomorrow? Before Chief Lu could reply, Zhao Yongquan interrupted. Tomorrow isn't suitable. Let's set off the day after tomorrow. He didn't say the reason and just said that coldly. Then he didn't say anything else. I was a bit curious. If he had something to say, why didn't he say it earlier? Why did he have to wait for me to say the date? It seemed like he was targeting me, but I didn't have any enmity with him. This was the first time we met, so why did he have to make things difficult for me? Was he trying to show me his power? Chief Lu seemed a bit awkward and said to me, "Mr. Xiao Shou, you see, naturally, I didn't need to argue with Zhao Yongquan. The date of the trip wasn't a big deal. It didn't matter if it was a day earlier or a day later. Thus I smiled and said, "Then we'll listen to Taoist Jiao. Let's set off at noon the day after tomorrow." Chief Lu nodded. After seeing that no one had any objections, he set the date. At first, Chief Lu had booked a luncheon at his hotel, but since the fatty and I hadn't seen each other for a long time, we had a lot to talk about. We declined the invitation and left Chief Lu's office. We found a random restaurant and sat down to talk about the things that had happened after we'd been separated for several years. According to the fatty, he was the president of the Feng Shui Metaphysics Association. After he left with he had arranged for him to study in a school in the city. However, after he had followed he had come in contact with many things related to Feng Shui metaphysics. He wasn't interested in studying anymore. He wanted to stay with he and learn about Feng Shui metaphysics. After learning from he for a period of time, Fatty gradually became very interested in divination and showed a strong talent. So he sent him to Kaifeng, where he was apprenticed to a very famous divination sect, Zhan Shi Dao Divination Grandmaster, and began to learn the way of divination. Strictly speaking, the fatty was a Taoist priest who specialized in divination. I was a little curious. Since you're a Taoist priest, why don't you wear a Taoist robe or a Taoist hairstyle? The fatty said with a serious voice, "As a disciple of the three pure ones, the three pure ones should always be in your heart. Why do you need to care about your appearance? Moreover, our Taoist school emphasizes on following our hearts. Of course, we should be free and unfettered." Seeing him talk nonsense with a straight face, just like when he was a kid, I felt relieved. Being a Taoist priest wasn't an idiot. After that, the fatty asked about me. Of course, I couldn't tell him about the red shadow, and I couldn't find any other excuse. I awkwardly told him that I had become interested in Feng Shui after that incident. So I bought some books and learned from the higher-ups. The fatty was a carefree man. I guessed he didn't notice my awkwardness. He didn't doubt me at all. It's not a good idea to study by myself. Later, I'll contact he. If I really want to study Feng Shui, I'll go and learn from him. I was quite interested in his suggestion. In the past few years, I had been learning from the death scripture. Sometimes I felt confused, and my understanding of many things was somewhat specious. If I could verify my knowledge with someone else, it would definitely help me advance my Feng Shui study. Moreover, it was easy for a person to get entangled by some misconceptions. It was like when I was trying to comprehend Qi. If it weren't for Professor Deng's words, I would still be muddle-headed. After chatting for a while, the fatty hesitated. "Third baby, I have a question I want to ask you about that incident. I haven't seen you for a few years, so I've been holding it in my heart." I was surprised. "What is it?" The fatty said, "That year, after we went to the graveyard to steal food, you told me that there was a female ghost wearing red clothes. She sat on your bed every night. Then we went to the entrance of the underground palace, and a woman wearing a veil came out. She was also wearing red clothes. I vaguely remember that the graveyard we went to when we were young was right above that underground palace." I pulled myself together and looked at the jovial fatty. He had suddenly become so serious. I panicked and wanted to tell him about the red shadow. However, I thought that I shouldn't tell anyone about it. I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I asked him why he suddenly asked me that question. The fatty's expression was a bit gloomy. He took a sip of the fruit juice in front of him and said in a low, muffled voice, "When I left, I burned down the ancestral home to complete my father's task. But in reality, I didn't find my father's body." He sighed and said, 9 generations of ancestors made 9 coffins. Other than being busy with other people's funerals, My father spent the rest of his time preparing the last coffin for himself, but who knew that after he really left, he couldn't even find his body. I furrowed my brows and asked the fat man, "The graveyard was only so big back then. Didn't you and he go back to look for him?" "Why didn't we?" The fat man shook his head. "When we burned down the ancestral home, I carried my father's coffin to the old house. I didn't burn it because I wanted to find my father's body in the future. Actually, on the second day after we left, he sent people to look for him, but they didn't find anything. Then, at the beginning of this year, after I finished my apprenticeship with Master, I went back again, but I still didn't find anything. That graveyard wasn't big, but my father must have fallen into the ground like us. But there were only a few tunnels underground. I asked he to ask the others, but they all said that they didn't see my father's body. Then I suspected that he might have been eaten by the skeleton monster. But even if he was eaten, there should be some leftovers, right? But no matter how much I dug, I couldn't find anything." The fat man rambled on, and I gradually understood what he meant. I asked him, "You think your father's body fell into the underground palace?" Fatty nodded. "We had fallen into the underground tunnel outside, but I asked he said that the 3 people beside him had fallen directly into the underground palace after they had fallen in. Logically speaking, that's impossible. The underground palace can only be entered through a hole with a formation. But he wouldn't lie to me on purpose. Now that my father's body can't be found, I think it's possible that he fell into the underground palace like he and the others." I nodded and asked him, "Then why didn't you dig deeper to find the tunnel? As long as we entered the tunnel, we would definitely find the underground palace." "Why didn't I dig?" The fat man smiled wryly. "When I went back before the new year, I brought a truck full of underground detection equipment. I even brought a set of the equipment that the exploration team used, which could reach up to 100 meters underground. But guess what? Let alone the underground palace, we couldn't even find the tunnel." Fatty continued indignantly, "When we left, didn't the place collapse? It was like a small earthquake. It's possible that it buried the passageways and the underground palace, but it's impossible for a small earthquake to make everything below disappear. I used the equipment I used. As long as there are traces left below, I'll definitely be able to find it. However, after a few days of hard work, the final conclusion was that there was absolutely nothing under the graveyard. So I thought about it and decided to start from somewhere else. In the underground palace, besides us who didn't know anything, there was only the skeleton, the female corpse, and the red shadow. The fat man was talking about starting from somewhere else. It was obvious that he was talking about the red shadow. However, even I didn't know where the red shadow was. Where could the fat man go to find her? I thought for a while and decided to be honest with the fat man. "You're right. The woman in the red dress is the female ghost I met when I was young. She often appeared around me. However, after we left the underground palace, I've never seen her again, just like you." The fatty originally had some hope, but after hearing what I said, he immediately became discouraged. He reached out and scratched his head. After a long while, he let out a sigh and said disappointedly, "All right then, it looks like there's no hope." I couldn't bear to see him like this. Even if we can't find his corpse, Uncle Lin will be buried in the underground palace. He'll be able to rest in peace. Whether he's buried in your family's house or in the underground palace, I'm sure Uncle Lin won't mind. You shouldn't worry too much about it. After listening to me, the fat man looked even more distressed. It seemed he had something to say in his heart. He pulled his hair. After a while, he said in a strange tone, "Third baby, I want to find my father's corpse. Not only do I want to bury him, but I also want to confirm if he's dead or not." I gawked. At that time, all of us saw his father stab his own heart with a dagger. Do we still need to confirm it? I looked at him worriedly. After keeping silent for a while, I said, Fatty, are you thinking that because you're too sad? Chapter 52. This trip would be dangerous, and I was mentally prepared. However, I had already sent people there, and something like this happened, yet Chief Lu kept it from us. I didn't know what he was thinking. I thought for a bit, then asked the waiter if he knew anything else. He shook his head and said, "That's all," and specifically told us not to tell anyone, saying that it would affect the tour here. At this time, Bai Ling came down from the stage and ran to our side. She enthusiastically asked us what we were talking about. She was Chief Lu's secretary, so she might have some relationship with Chief Lu. Naturally, I didn't say much and just casually chatted with her. Although the fatty and Bai Ling bickered, as soon as they met, Bai Ling's personality was actually quite warm and straightforward. After chatting for a while, she even smiled and asked me how her singing was. Before I could reply, the fatty said with disdain, "How can you sing so happily with that tone-deaf voice of yours? Do you know why we're here? We're not here for sightseeing, singing, and going to bars." Whenever this guy talked to Bai Ling, his mouth was full of bullets. I moved back a bit and gave the place to these two lovebirds. Bai Ling casually pulled a chair over and sat down. She pouted and said, "Why don't I know? It's not a secret. Chief Lu's map clearly says that it's the fire god temple. It says that there's some kind of gem that can't be seen, and the secret that can make people immortal. You can also obtain the power of the fire god. It's really mysterious." I blanked. I didn't see what Bai Ling said on the map Chief Lu gave me. I glanced at the fatty and casually asked, "What else is written there?" Bai Ling pouted. "It's like a horror novel. It says that people are burned alive, and when they wake up, they can't see anything. I don't know why Chief Lu tore off the latter part. He's probably worried that you guys would be scared after reading it and not dare to go. Come to think of it, people like you should really believe in those kinds of evil and superstitious things. You guys aren't that old, but one knows feng shui, and the other is a fortune teller. It's really rare." After chatting for a while, Bai Ling received a call and said that she had to go to Chief Lu's place to take care of some matters. Then she smiled and said goodbye to us. After she left, I exchanged glances with the fatty. Before I came here, I had checked the information with the fatty. The information provided by Boss Lu was the same as mine. He only knew the story and half of the map. Boss Lu didn't mention anything else. The fatty spoke first. "Looks like this Lu guy wasn't telling the truth. He tricked us into coming here, just like that." I shook my head. Bai Ling might not be telling the truth. It's not that simple. Fatty was stunned and said hesitantly, "Although this woman has a strange temper, she shouldn't be that shrewd. Would she purposely lie to us?" His words made me frown. Originally, I was happy to see the two of them being so close to each other. However, the situation was getting more and more complicated. I couldn't see through Bai Ling. If the fatty really had something going on with this woman, it wouldn't be a good thing. I said, "Why don't you think about it? How could this young lady be that naive? They clearly knew how dangerous this trip was, yet they still came along just for some benefits. They didn't even care about their lives. How could he enjoy the scenery so easily along the way? This Bai Ling definitely isn't simple. You should be mentally prepared." Hearing me say that, the fatty became silent. He thought about it and didn't say anything else. The next day, when the sky was just starting to brighten, we got up and gathered. Facing the morning sun, we embarked on our journey. At the beginning, we could still see an endless stream of tourists. As the journey continued and we left the man-made scenic area, the number of tourists decreased. In the end, there were only a dozen or so of us left. The two tall and sturdy middle-aged men that we met before were called Tang Mingyang and Fan Jichao, other than the fatty and a few others that I saw the other day. The rest of the team were all arranged by these two people. They were all young lads around 27 or 28 years old. Each and every one of them had straight shoulders and a well-trained appearance. They looked like the retired special forces that Chief Lu mentioned. At this moment, Tang Mingyang and Fan Jichao followed beside Boss Lu and Zhao Yongquan. The group walked in front and led the way according to the map. The fatty, me, and Bai Ling walked at the back under the protection of the others. This was also Boss Lu's arrangement. He said that he wanted to protect us and not make any mistakes. As we moved forward, the road under our feet became more and more desolate. However, it seemed that someone had walked on the road recently. There was already a narrow path, so we didn't need to waste time to clear a path. At noon, the group reached a canyon. I lifted my head to look at the terrain on both sides of the canyon. My eyes brightened. In the study of feng shui, the method of looking at the earth was to observe the dragon, and the art of observing the dragon was to examine the gorge. It was recorded in the death scripture. The gorge is where the true feelings of the dragon are found. Without a true dragon, there would be no beautiful gorge, and without a beautiful gorge, there would be no auspicious land. The meaning of this sentence was that by examining the terrain of the gorge, one could see the authenticity of the dragon's vein. If the dragon's vein was real, then the gorge's feng shui would be magnificent. If the gorge's feng shui was magnificent, then one could find a good place with good feng shui. Although this was just a normal mountain dragon's vein, it was different from the dragon's vein that geomasters searched for. However, the true dragon's vein that geomasters searched for was usually hidden in these mountain dragon's veins. When searching for these normal dragon's veins, one might find a trace of true dragon's energy and find the true dragon's vein. The appearance of a normal gorge was characterized by a broken lotus root and a gray line on a grass snake. It was also characterized by a bee's waist and crane's knees. The broken lotus root and the connected silk referred to the flow of water. If there was a meandering river in the gorge, the broken lotus root and the connected silk would appear and disappear from time to time. This meant that there was good feng shui. The gray line on the grass snake referred to the path under the gorge. If there was no path, it could be described as water. The bee's waist and crane's knees referred to the beauty of the gorge being long, but it couldn't be straight. It had to be slightly curved. Wherever there was a gorge, looking at the gorge to find the dragon was a shortcut. As for the gorge in front of us, the mountain range on the left rose up, giving the feeling of a loop. From the study of feng shui, this was called the welcoming gorge. The mountain range on the right was separated from the mountain range, giving the feeling of giving way. This was called sending the vein. All in all, this gorge was long and slightly curved. The mountain ranges on both sides were sending and receiving, sandwiching, and carrying. It was well guarded, and the water was clearly divided. Moreover, the mountains on both sides were lush with vegetation, as if they were covered with a blanket. This kind of terrain was called the Crimson Brook Gorge. It was a good place with good feng shui. If we could find an auspicious cave in this gorge, we would be able to ensure our descendants' prosperity. In the past, I had only read about dead knowledge in the death scripture. Now that I saw the scenery in front of me and matched it with my knowledge, I felt that this trip wasn't in vain. Feng shui also changed because of the environment. In modern society, good feng shui was usually found in remote places. Normally, it was rare to see one. If a feng shui master wanted to find the dragon, he had to go to every dangerous secret territory. This gorge was really long. If we wanted to find the dragon vein, we would have to go there and slowly search. I wasn't in a hurry. As we approached the gorge, There was a river blocking the way. When Chief Lu and the others reached the river, they stopped and signaled us to rest. When we stopped to have lunch, Tang Mingyang and Fan Jichao sent some people along the river to find a way to cross the river. Half an hour later, the people returned. They said that they couldn't find a way to cross the river. There was a suspension bridge not far from here, but it was damaged. Chief Lu asked if we could swim across. Fan Jichao, who hadn't been smiling, said in a low, muffled voice, "This water is strange. I just tasted it, and it's salty. Moreover, under the sunlight, the water turns black. According to my experience, this river is around 40 meters wide, and it should be more than 100 meters deep." As soon as he said that, Bai Ling exclaimed in disbelief, "This should be a small river. How could it be 100 meters deep? Even the Yellow River and Yangtze River aren't that deep." Tang Mingyang explained with a smile, "If the water turns black, it means that the area where the sunlight shines is very shallow. There's a deep water area underneath that the sunlight can't penetrate. Usually, the water area that turns black is more than 100 meters deep. Moreover, the situation in the deep water is complicated, and we don't know the creatures in the water. If we swim across, we'll be in trouble." At this moment, two mountain people carrying baskets on their backs walked over. They were walking by the river not far from us. They looked like a father and son. Chief Lu signaled Tang Mingyang with his eyes. Tang Mingyang quickly sent someone to call the father and son over. When we came close, I could see that the father and son were probably doctors who came to collect herbs. The young man's left hand was wrapped in bandages, and there were fresh bloodstains on it. It seemed he had just been injured. Chapter 54. After this incident, the originally slightly relaxed atmosphere suddenly disappeared. Fan Jichao's subordinates had a good relationship with Xiao He. They hurried to go to the river to find Xiao He. However, Fan Jichao kicked them all back. With a gloomy face, they went to see Chief Lu for instructions. Soon, Chief Lu called me and the fatty over. Zhao Yongquan was next to Chief Lu. He was standing by the river with a compass in his hand. He seemed to be calculating something. Since this happened, Fan Jichao, Tang Mingyang, and the other veterans couldn't do anything. We could only rely on the methods of outsiders. However, from the moment we arrived at the river, I had been observing the surrounding geomancy and the changes in yin and yang. No matter how I looked at it, this place didn't seem to have any problems. It wasn't a yin gathering ground or a corpse breeding ground. It was just an ordinary river. There was nothing strange about this place. Up until now, I hadn't found the problem. At least, I couldn't tell from the geomancy. If I wanted to find out the situation, I would need to use the eye or the snake spirit. However, Zhao Yongquan was here, so I couldn't use them. After all, Professor Deng's mistake was a warning. Chief Lu asked me. After I shook my head, he looked disappointed. He turned to the fatty and asked, "What do you think?" The fatty shook his head. "I can only predict good or bad luck, but I can't predict the cause." Chief Lu asked again, "What about good or bad luck?" The fatty didn't answer. He squinted and flipped his hand. I didn't know when, but 3 copper coins appeared in his palm. I didn't see him flip his hand, but the 3 coins suddenly jumped twice. Then I heard the fatty speak in a voice that was completely different from before. He said calmly, "The heavenly thunder is unexpected. Good luck." While the fatty was talking, a strange light flashed in his squinted left eye. Then I saw his left pupil lengthen. When he said the word G, the pupil split in the middle, turning into 2 pupils, one above and one below. As soon as he said that, he put away the 3 copper coins. The upper and lower pupils fused together and returned to normal. There were 5 branches of Taoism: mountain, medicine, fate, xiang, and divination. Although the Tao of divination was ranked last, it was the most profound and unpredictable, especially Fatty's Tao of divination. He did not cultivate Tao techniques and only looked at the mysteries of heaven. During the Tang Dynasty, Li Chunfeng and Yuan Tiangang created the pushing back diagram, which unexpectedly allowed them to pry into the fate of the nation for thousands of years. There was another characteristic of divination. Although it was an orthodox Taoist practice, it was destined to have 5 drawbacks and 3 flaws because it recklessly predicted the secrets of the heavens. Therefore, since ancient times there were many blind and crippled divine fortune-tellers, and many divination grandmasters would have many strange phenomena when they were divining their divinations. It could even be said that the more strange the phenomenon, the more profound the divination would be. Moreover, this was a kind of talent, not something that could be acquired. Fatty had told me before that he was talented in divination, but I didn't expect that he would be able to trigger a vision when he was doing divination. Moreover, it was such an amazing vision. Hearing Fatty's conclusion of good luck, Director Lu's face turned even uglier. A person had disappeared in front of him. No matter how he looked at it, it was not a good omen, but Fatty had received an auspicious divination. It was really hard to accept. After asking us twice, Director Lu didn't get any results. He turned to look at Zhao Yongquan, pinning his hopes on him. Unfortunately, Zhao Yongquan had been divining by the riverbank for almost half an hour. He looked tired and shook his head at Director Lu. Although he didn't say anything, it was clear that he hadn't found anything. While the 3 of us were silent, the old soldiers who were discussing by the riverbank screamed in surprise. They pointed at the river in the distance and started to discuss something. Our faces changed. We hurried to the riverbank and looked into the distance. Around 1 kilometer away from us, there was a black object. We could vaguely see that it was a corpse. Did Xiaohe's corpse come out of the water? If we could see the corpse, it was possible that Xiaohe's death was caused by a whirlpool under the water. We had thought too much about it. Everyone stared at the corpse as it floated closer to us. Only the fat guy suddenly performed another divination. In the same calm voice, he chanted, "Regenerate the land. There is a path in front of the mountain." I hadn't studied divination before, so I asked the fatty, what did he mean? The fatty put away the copper coins and smiled. "There's a chance." Because of that corpse? The fatty nodded. Most likely. As the corpse was floating closer and closer to us, Fan Jichao found a 5-clawed hook and tied it to a climbing rope. He waved it continuously. When the corpse reached the middle of the river in front of us, Fan Jichao loosened his grip. The 5-clawed hook flew 20 meters and landed on the corpse. Fan Jichao dragged the corpse toward us. Xiaohe was wearing black clothes, and the corpse looked black from the outside. It seemed to be Xiaohe. However, as the corpse got closer, we could tell that it wasn't Xiaohe. The corpse was lying face down in the river. From a distance, it looked like it was wearing black clothes. However, the corpse was naked. The black color was because the corpse had been dead for a long time. After the skin had rotted, it had been scorched by the sun. Chapter 55. Looking at this shocking scene, I remembered what my friend had told me. On the 1st and 15th day of each month, corpses would come to the Yellow Spring River. At that time, I had thought that it was just a random, nameless corpse, so I didn't pay much attention to it. However, after seeing this scene, I finally understood why my friend had said that no one in the village had ever swum in this river, and why they called this river the Yellow Spring. The corpses were lined up in a straight line, silently drifting forward. Under the bright sky, I couldn't see the end of the line. How many corpses did they have to have such an effect? My heart skipped a beat. If there were only corpses, it wouldn't be a problem. However, if they were all like the previous corpse, there would be a large number of ghosts waiting for us. Although those dried corpses didn't have any clothes on, and I couldn't tell which era they were from, they were at least several hundred years old. Ghosts that had been bred for several hundred years couldn't be underestimated. Moreover, there was a large number of them. Not only did my face turn grim, but the fatty and Zhao Yongkuan also had the same expression. With Zhao Yongkuan's hand seal, he could deal with one or two ordinary ghosts at the same time, no matter how strong they were. However, the number of corpses in front of us seemed endless. If even 1/10 of the corpses we saw turned into ghosts, we wouldn't be able to deal with them. Moreover, the number of corpses kept appearing. Who knew how many more we hadn't seen? If we couldn't deal with them, we would have to summon Tong. To Tong, as long as the other ghosts didn't turn into Een spirits and become Een gods, the number didn't matter. After the corpses lined up in a straight line and floated past us, people gradually got used to it. They recovered from the shock and started to guess the origin of these corpses. Chief Lu called us together. He didn't talk about the large number of corpses in front of us. Do you want to take a detour? Tang Mingyang and Fan Jichao agreed, but Zhao Yongkuan and I didn't agree with this suggestion. Although we knew how dangerous those corpses were, we were metaphysicians. We had seen this strange situation before, so we had to investigate it. If we didn't do anything because of the danger, how could we improve our metaphysician's realm? Seeing that we weren't enthusiastic, President Lu felt a little awkward. Although he wasn't a metaphysician, he clearly felt the danger. If he didn't make a prompt decision now, who knew what would happen after dark? However, he had to consider my and Zhao Yongkuan's face. Just as he was hesitating, Fatty suddenly said, "I remember when the father and son left today, the young man seemed to have something to say, but he was interrupted by his father." "Huh." President Lu frowned and turned to ask him, "What do you mean?" The fat man smiled and said, "That father and son pair look like herb farmers. Obviously, they gather herbs for a living. Rare herbs usually grow in the mountains. Today, the father and son were carrying empty baskets. Obviously, they were going into the mountains to pick herbs. But after meeting us, they went back in the direction they came from. Don't you think it's a little strange?" Zhao Yongkuan also reacted. "You mean the father and son know the way to cross the river?" Fatty nodded. "Although this place is already deserted, it only took us one morning to get here from the scenic area. For herb gatherers, this place is far from being deep in the mountains, and it's even more impossible for them to pick good herbs. Combining all the circumstances, the father and son pair definitely know the way to cross the river." President Lu thought for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, "All right, since they know the way to cross the river, let's invite them over. Fan Jichao." President Lu called Fan Jichao over and gave him some instructions. Then, Fan Jichao brought 4 to 5 people with him and hurriedly headed in the direction of the village downstream according to the map. As for the rest of us, we stayed by the riverbank to rest. However, because the large number of corpses in the river looked too scary, we retreated a few hundred meters away from the riverbank in the end. About 2 hours later, when we finished dinner in the evening, Fan Jichao came back with his people. Together with him was the father and son pair, who looked like they were in tears. Judging from their efficiency, Fan Jichao must have found them and kidnapped them without saying a word. President Lu tried to talk to them in a friendly manner, implying that we must cross the river and that we needed their help. The young man seemed a little scared and didn't talk much. His father kept shaking his head, saying that Grandpa Mountain God wanted to punish them. In the end, President Lu couldn't stand it anymore. He directly took out 50,000 renminbi and said that it was their reward and their last condition. If they didn't accept the toast, they would have to drink the forfeit. The old man didn't seem to be moved. However, before he could say anything, the young man agreed. "Okay, I'll take you across the river." At first, we had only guessed that they had a way to cross the river. But now that it was confirmed, they couldn't refuse. The old man looked at his son with a sorrowful face. In the end, he could only nod reluctantly. At this moment, the negative emotions caused by the floating corpses in the river were finally relieved. We heaved a sigh of relief. The father and his son also introduced themselves. Their surnames were Zhang, so we called them Old Zhang and Little Zhang. After agreeing to take us across the river, Old Zhang told us how to do it. "Tonight, at midnight, a path will appear on the river. I know the location, and I'll take you there." A path will appear on the river? It sounded a little strange. Instinctively, we didn't believe it. However, when we asked Old Zhang, he didn't want to tell us. "When the time comes, we'll know if we follow him there. Don't be afraid." Tang Mingyang and the others laughed. If he's not afraid of the floating corpses on the river, why would he be afraid of anything else? Old Zhang said slowly, "That bridge is more dangerous than those corpses." Tang Mingyang smirked to show that he didn't believe him. The others also laughed and didn't put Old Zhang's words in their eyes. It was time for dinner. We used the supplies we had brought and ate to fill our stomachs. Then we started to pack up and prepare to leave. Before we left, Old Zhang went to find Mr. Liu. "Tonight, I'll take you across the river. Can I let my son, Little Zhang, go back to the village first?" Mr. Liu smiled and called Little Zhang. He took out 50,000 renminbi and said, "If you go alone, you can take one person's money. If you go with two people, you can take two people's money." As soon as he said that, Little Zhang said, "I can go with you." Old Zhang sighed begrudgingly and didn't mention it again. After packing up, around 11 p.m., Old Zhang took us to the upper reaches of the Yellow Spring River. Since we were walking along the riverbank, the full moon shone brightly on the river. We could see a row of floating corpses clearly in the dim light of the night. The surroundings were gloomy and gloomy. However, after looking at it for a long time, my heart gradually became numb. We were moving in the opposite direction of the floating corpses. However, our team was in a straight line, which looked similar to the line of corpses. I glanced at my team and then at the line of corpses on the river. I felt as if life and death were blending together. Soon after, Old Zhang and his son, who were walking at the front of the team, stopped and signaled to me that we had arrived. I lifted my head to look at the river and couldn't help but take in a deep breath. The river in front of us was also full of corpses. However, they weren't in a straight line like the ones downstream. Many corpses were piled up horizontally, covering the entire river. Moreover, these corpses were not crawling in the water. Instead, they were lying on their backs. On their skull-like heads, black mouths were wide open, staring straight at the moon in the sky, as if they were trying to absorb the moonlight. The moonlight shone on the two eye sockets, giving these mummies a pair of moon-white eyes. It looked strange and terrifying. The bridge that Old Zhang was talking about was actually the floating corpse bridge made of a pile of corpses. Looking at the numerous corpses under the moonlight, I recalled the death scriptures saying that zombies were born by swallowing the moonlight. My heart felt numb. When the people on the riverbank saw this scene, they all let out a cry of surprise and subconsciously took a step back. By the time they reacted, Big Head had been tightly hugged by the corpse. He fell on the other corpses and struggled desperately. This guy may have seen mountains of corpses and seas of blood, but he had never been hugged by a corpse. He struggled and screamed in fear. Tang Mingyang's veterans were the first to respond. Several of them rolled up their sleeves and prepared to go down to save people, regardless of why the dried corpse was moving. It could be seen that these people had deep feelings for each other. At this time, Lao Jing shouted again, "Don't move. You can't go down there." Just now, they didn't listen to Lao Zheng's arrangement. Now that he said it again, Tang Mingyang and the others did not dare to act rashly and stopped. Lao Zheng hurriedly ran to the river and shouted at Big Head, who was still entangled with the dried corpse, "Don't move. Slowly move Master Gu's hands and feet away. You'll be fine. Hurry up and come back." After all, Big Head was a retired veteran. At first, he was scared and struggled. Now that he heard Lao Zheng's words, he quickly calmed down. He reached out and slowly moved the dried corpse's arms and legs away. Then his body shrank little by little and ran back to the shore like a dog. When he came up, Lao Zheng knelt on the shore and muttered to Master Gu, "Please don't blame me." Tang Mingyang and his people quickly surrounded Big Head and checked him for a long time. Except for his clothes being a little wet, there was nothing serious. Boss Lu walked over with a gloomy face. After waiting for Lao Zheng to atone for the corpse in the river for a long time, he asked, "Old friend, what's going on? Didn't you say that we can cross the river from here? Why are these corpses moving?" Old Jing got up from the ground. He looked angry and said, "We can cross the river from here, but I haven't finished talking yet. These old skeletons won't harm people. However, when people walk, some of them will touch human energy and jump up to attack them. I was about to tell you about this, but your people just jumped up. You can't blame me for this." After listening to Old Chung, I nodded. According to the death scripture, when the moon shone on a corpse, this could happen. However, these corpses weren't old skeletons, as Old Chung had mentioned. They were called shadow corpses. After the shadow corpses came into contact with people and inhaled human energy, they could move. However, they didn't have consciousness and couldn't bite people. They could only follow the smell of living people and jump on them. These shadow corpses weren't really scary. They just used their yang energy to move a little. However, there were too many corpses in front of us. If they all got up, it would be troublesome. Chief Lu wanted to discuss with us, but Old Chung said, "These corpses can only appear before 3 a.m. After that, the corpses will scatter. We must cross the river immediately." We didn't have any objections, but Zhao Yongquan shook his head. "It's not good to cross the river like this. I need to check the corpses first." I understood that he was worried about the soulless corpse he had seen earlier. If all these corpses were soulless corpses, when we crossed the river, we would encounter a large number of ghosts. Little Zheng was worried. Several generations of my family have stepped on corpses to collect herbs in the mountain. At most, they would encounter the old skeletons people. But there's no danger. Who was Zhao Yongquan? He didn't care about Little Zheng. He directly asked his men to go to the shore and drag the corpses up. Tang Mingyang's men went there and hooked a corpse. However, they couldn't drag it up. The lower part of the corpse was tangled by something that looked like seaweed. Eventually, Zhao Yongquan had no choice but to go to the shore. He asked his men to tie the corpse to the shore with a rope. Then, he used the soul-searching seal to search the corpse's soul. When I saw him make a hand seal to guide his Tao energy, I suddenly remembered something in the death scripture. If a corpse shone on by the moon took a breath of qi, it would become a shadow corpse. However, if it took a breath of Tao energy, it would become a zombie. Zombies weren't like the shadow corpses, which didn't have any intelligence and only knew how to pounce on people. Zombies were brutal and liked to eat human blood. They would kill anyone they saw. If they really created a zombie, it would be a big problem. With this thought, I hurried to stop Zhao Yongquan. No matter what, don't use your Tao energy to touch the corpse. You might create a zombie. After Zhao Yongquan's hand seal was interrupted, he frowned and turned to look at me. Are you from the Xiangxi corpse-raising sect? I didn't know why he asked that. Instinctively, I shook my head. Zhao Yongquan asked again, Are you from the Miao area? I shook my head one more time. Zhao Yongquan swung his sleeves and said unhappily, Kid, if you don't know about zombies, why are you talking nonsense? It turned out that he didn't believe me. I couldn't blame him. The corpse-raising sect was very mysterious in the metaphysics world. They didn't have much contact with the outside world. Moreover, the method to create zombies was a secret technique that outsiders couldn't easily learn. If it weren't for the records in the death scripture, I wouldn't have known about it. I was worried about how to explain it to Zhao Yongquan, but he didn't say anything and continued to make hand seals. Chapter 57. In folklore, zombies were commonly seen. However, real zombies rarely appeared. In the legends, the shadow corpses were considered zombies, and even some dried corpses that couldn't move were considered zombies. Although their numbers were small, their power was extraordinary. Zombies were different from Yin souls. After a person died, Yin souls were formed by 2 of the 3 souls. They didn't have a physical body. Although they were mysterious and unpredictable, they didn't have any real power. They could only use bewitchment and confusion to harm people. Normal geomancy masters, or people who understood geomancy, had ways to deal with them. However, zombies were a physical body. They were monsters that were born after a person's body didn't rot after death. In legends, zombies were soulless corpses. After the 3 souls were scattered, the 7 spirits controlled the body, which gave birth to a ferocious monster. The saying of 3 souls and 7 spirits had been around for a long time. However, geomancy masters could easily sense the 3 souls, but the 7 spirits were vague. Only when they reached the heavenly master realm could they understand a thing or two. Moreover, even the lowest level of zombies was stronger than humans. Moreover, they weren't afraid of swords or spears. They didn't know pain, and they often carried corpse energy and corpse poison. Not to mention ordinary people, even ordinary geomancy masters couldn't deal with them. Only after reaching the earthly master realm could they use talismans and other methods to deal with them. In the death scripture, there were several corpse-subduing talismans that could be used to deal with ordinary zombies. However, this was under the premise that the geomancy master had prepared beforehand. If an earthly master met a low-level zombie, the geomancy master didn't have the corpse-subduing talisman, so he wouldn't be a match for the zombie. Moreover, this was just the lowest-level zombie. If the geomancy master met a high-level zombie, even the corpse-subduing talisman wouldn't be able to deal with it. This was also the reason why the corpse-nurturing sects were so powerful in the metaphysics world. Through the corpse-controlling technique, even a newbie in the corpse-nurturing sect could control an ordinary corpse. Their strength was not to be underestimated. Because of the zombie's power and toughness, I panicked and tried to dissuade Zhao Yongquan. However, he didn't appreciate it. After drawing his energy and forming a hand seal, he directly pressed his palm on the dried corpse's abdomen. Seeing this, I secretly prepared myself. If the dried corpse turned into a zombie and became difficult to deal with, I would call the fatty and run away. It was a dangerous journey to begin with, and Zhao Yongquan wanted to create danger himself. I didn't need to stay and die with him. When Zhao Yongquan's handprint pressed onto the mummy's body visibly trembled a few times. However, it immediately calmed down, as if nothing had happened. What was going on? Could it be that there was a mistake in the death scripture? I looked at the dried corpse, which hadn't changed at all. I was puzzled. Zhao Yongquan slowly retracted his hand, and glanced at me. Although he didn't say anything, everyone could see the disdain in his eyes. I quietly recalled the records about zombies in the death scripture. I was puzzled, but I didn't say anything. However, Zhao Yongquan frowned again. He turned around and told Director Liu that the corpse was still a soulless corpse. He was worried that a large number of spirits would appear nearby. While the two of them were discussing, little Zheng seemed to be very impatient. He shouted that his family had crossed the river from here for generations. If there was any danger, his family would have died long ago, and it would have been impossible for it to be passed down to the present day. Don't worry, and just follow him to cross the river. What he said made sense. Eventually, after Director Liu and Zhao Yongquan discussed, they asked old Zheng to take us across the river. Since we had to be on guard against the shadow corpses, we formed a big circle. After we stepped on the bridge, we carefully walked to the other side. Only old Zheng and his son stood outside of us, one in front of the other, watching the surrounding situation. After going down into the river, the Yin corpses pounced on them again, but with the example of Big Head, everyone calmed down a lot this time. After pulling the Yin corpses away, they didn't care much and quickly left. When we reached the center of the river, we heard a scream from the back of the group. I followed the voice and was surprised to see little Zheng. A dried corpse was crawling on his body, tightly hugging his neck. Since the shadow corpses kept pouncing on people, we weren't surprised anymore, especially Tang Mingyang's subordinate, Big Head. He burst out laughing and shouted sarcastically, "Weren't you bold when you scolded others? Now that it's your turn, why are you so timid?" As soon as he said that, the other veterans burst out laughing. They didn't come to help, just standing there and watching the joke. Eventually, old Zheng ran to us. As soon as he saw his son's appearance, his face changed. He screamed and dashed forward. At this moment, I also found that something was wrong. No matter how timid little Zheng was, when a dried corpse pounced on him, he should have struggled a few times. However, after he was pounced on, he only screamed once. Then, he didn't make another sound. Although I couldn't see clearly under the moonlight, I could vaguely feel that the dried corpse holding little Zheng was different from the ones that had pounced on people earlier. I suddenly remembered what had happened and turned to look at the riverbank. Chapter 58. When old Zheng was in danger, and Zhao Yongquan went to save him, my impression of Zhao Yongquan had changed. I thought that although he was stubborn and arrogant, at least he had a conscience and morals. Who would have thought that he would bring trouble to me in just a blink of an eye? In terms of metaphysics, I was much weaker than Zhao Yongquan. If he couldn't deal with the black zombie, I couldn't do anything about it. He wanted to kill me by bringing the black zombie to me. The Taoists had the mouse summoning technique. They could cast talismans on their bodies and invite ghosts and gods to possess them. I had seen the Taoist priest who had joined hands with old He to fight the female corpse use the mouse summoning technique. Zhao Yongquan had just used the mouse summoning technique to carry old Zheng and run away. Although he was much slower than the black zombie because of old Zheng, he was still faster than ordinary people. At least, he was faster than me. As the black zombie was dashing toward me, I couldn't run away. I had to force myself to read the golden light divine incantation. Heaven and earth mystic sect, the root of all energies. Cultivate a billion tribulations to prove my divine powers. Inside and outside the three realms, the Tao reigns supreme. My body has golden light covering my body. See but not see, hear but not hear. Encompassing heaven and earth, nurturing all living beings. Recite it 10,000 times. My body has light. Guards of the three realms, 5 kings welcome. 10,000 gods worship, controlling thunder and lightning. The ghosts and demons were frightened, and the spirits and monsters lost their forms. Thunder and lightning, concealing the name of the thunder god. Insight and wisdom intersect. 5 energies surge. Golden light appears quickly, covering my body. The golden light divine incantation was a great incantation. It could be used to make talismans, hand seals, and even hand seals. However, with my current power, I could barely recite the incantation. As soon as I finished reading the golden light divine incantation, a golden light appeared on my body and covered me completely. In the next second, the black zombie tore through the air and pounced on me. Because of the golden light, the black zombie didn't directly touch my body. Instead, he touched the golden light first. This golden light was formed from the stellar energy of heaven and earth, and it possessed an unparalleled destructive power against all evil beings. The moment the black zombie's body came into contact with the golden light, a large amount of corpse chi emitted from it, and it was sent flying with a miserable shriek. I didn't have it easy either. Although I had blocked the attack, the strength of the black zombie's attack was too great. After he was sent flying, I was also knocked to the ground. I tasted something sweet in my throat and spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, the golden light on my body extinguished. If the dark zombie pounced on me again, I would have died here. I endured the pain in my chest. As soon as I fell to the ground, I quickly got up and held the magic compass in my hand. I was prepared to ask the snake spirit to help me escape when the black zombie charged at me again. This snake spirit was a snake spirit that had cultivated for many years when it was alive. Although its power had been greatly reduced because of the disappearance of the Yin energy from the compass, it was still more than enough to help me escape. This magic compass was too precious. If I used it to escape, I would have to expose myself. However, I didn't have time to worry about that at this moment. The black zombie was burned by the golden light, and its tough body had many wounds. Corpse chi gushed out, which was the source of the dark zombie's power. It was obvious that it had been hurt badly. The dark zombie was hot-tempered, and at this moment, it was even more enraged. After the corpse chi on its body extinguished the golden light, it screeched and stormed toward me again. Director Liu, who was standing not far from me, shouted for Zhao Yongquan to come and help. The fatty also ran toward me. I held the compass tightly in my hand, but I didn't call the snake spirit. I didn't want to expose the magic compass until the last moment. Just as Black Zombie was a few steps away from me and was about to pounce on me, Zhao Yongquan suddenly tossed out a slender stone-like object and muttered, "Suppress." Then, the stone-like object quickly flew to the top of the black zombie's head and pressed down. I took a closer look. That slender stone-like object was actually a paperweight. It looked really small, but when it flew above the black zombie's head, it seemed like it was carrying a 1,000-kilogram boulder on its back. Its pouncing movements were stopped, and it couldn't even fight. It fell face up into the river. I was startled. I looked at the small paperweight again. It was glowing with Tao energy. It was a magic tool. Although it wasn't a magical tool with a spirit like the compass, this kind of magical tool was still rare. It was a suppressive magical tool. The paperweight originally had the ability to suppress, and it had been nourished by Zhao Yongquan for many years. Although it looked like a small stone, it was no different from a 10,000-kilogram boulder to an evil being. Even the incomparably strong black zombie couldn't resist it. Zhao Yongquan was worthy of his title as the president of the Taoist Association in the city. He had casually taken out such a rare magical tool. After being pressed into the river, the dark zombie was unwilling to give up and struggled again. However, he couldn't get rid of the paperweight's suppressive power. He slowly laid there motionlessly. I finally let go of the magical compass and exhaled. Zhao Yongquan calmly walked in front of me and looked at me strangely. Chapter 59. When we reached the shore, One of Fan Jichao's veterans suddenly screamed. His body sank into the water and disappeared. Xiao He, the one who had tried to swim, also sank and disappeared. At that time, I suspected that there was a giant fish underwater. However, since we were far away, I couldn't see clearly, so I couldn't come to a conclusion. At this moment, that veteran was less than 10 meters away from me. He had disappeared without a trace. It couldn't be a water monster. Fan Jichao wanted to dive into the water to check, but Tang Mingyang pulled him back. Let's cross the river first. It's clear that we have to give up on that veteran. Fan Jichao didn't have the heart to do that, but Chief Lu urged him to hurry. Eventually, Fan Jichao had to give up and climb to the shore. The corpses in the river were bobbing up and down. The veterans were agile. When they reached the riverbank, they just needed to grab the water plants by the table to get up. The fatty, and I didn't have this ability. We had to rely on Fan Jichao and Tang Mingyang to pull us up one by one. When I got to the shore, the corpses in the river were like boiled dumplings. They were bobbing up and down. Some of the corpses were tossed into the air. They were connected to something that looked like a long rope. I didn't know how far they were going to go, but I couldn't see the end. At the bottom of the river, I heard a loud, rumbling noise. It sounded like a house collapsing during an earthquake or a giant beast roaring. Although we didn't know what was down there, we all felt the danger. After we got to the shore, we hurried to retreat. When I was about to leave, I saw the fatty, who had just gotten to the shore, crawl toward the river again. He was shouting something, but the commotion at the bottom of the river covered his voice. I couldn't hear him clearly. I looked into the river and saw that Bai Ling was still in the water. The corpse under my feet couldn't stand anymore. Half of his body was in the water, and he was grabbing the water plants by the shore. His other hand was trying to reach up, but he couldn't reach the hand of the person on the shore. He was so anxious that his face was covered in tears. The fatty was also restless. He almost wanted to jump into the water to save Bai Ling. I pulled him back and prepared to read the 5 ghosts carrying spell to lift Bai Ling out of the water. However, before I could finish my chant, I felt the yin energy around us rise. I stopped. The 5 ghosts transfer spell was used to summon 5 ghosts nearby to help. Normally, it would only attract some wandering ghosts, so it wasn't a big deal. However, there were so many soulless corpses here, so who knew how many ghosts were hiding in the surroundings? If a ghost with a high cultivation was attracted, then it wouldn't be saving people, but harming people. With such a delay, Bai Ling's body slid further into the river. Chapter 60. Perhaps it was because of the golden head, but I was very sensitive to golden things. I rubbed my eyes and lifted my head to look at Chief Lu. However, he didn't seem to care. He didn't look frightened or tired. Quite the contrary, he looked excited. He asked Zhao Yongquan and me to wake up the others. Since he didn't want to talk about it, I didn't ask further. Zhao Yongquan, the fatty, and I woke up the others. From a medical point of view, fainting was a way for the human body to protect itself. I thought it would be troublesome to wake them up. Who would have thought that I just patted each of them gently, and they all woke up? However, after they woke up, they reacted strangely. They looked around and asked in surprise, "Hey, how did we get to the riverbank?" The fatty and I looked at each other in surprise. After asking around, we found out that everyone who had fainted had forgotten about their last experience on the shore. They only remembered that they had encountered the black zombie on the way. After that, they couldn't remember anything else. Although I didn't know the reason, I felt that it was related to that giant golden head. Does that head have the power to make people lose their memories? I couldn't believe it. Those people had just glanced at the golden head. if it could make them lose their memories after just one glance. How terrifying was that golden head? We didn't mention the golden head. After Tang Mingyang and Fan Jichao's men rested for a while, Chief Lu asked them to set up tents and set up camp. The rest of us lit a bonfire and gathered around it to warm up. Although it was summer, the temperature difference between day and night was big in the mountains. Moreover, when we crossed the river, our clothes were wet. At this moment, we could feel the cold air. At first, Zhao Yongkuan, and the others were a little nervous. We were worried that there would be ghosts around the river. However, after waiting for a long time, we didn't see anything strange. We slowly relaxed. Chief Lu and Zhao Yongkuan were talking in low voices. After the frightening scene, Bai Ling and the fatty's relationship had improved a lot. They didn't quarrel anymore. Instead, they gathered together and whispered to each other. From the looks of it, they had become friends. I was the only one left. I held a bottle of wine in my hand and sipped it to ward off the cold. I couldn't stop thinking about the giant golden head. I didn't know why, but when I looked at the golden head, I kept thinking about the red shadow. The golden head was huge, while the red shadow was thin. The face of the golden head had many strange phenomena, but I had never seen the face of the red shadow before. However, these two things that had nothing to do with each other kept appearing in my head. I couldn't understand why. Perhaps it was because of the red shadow, but I subconsciously grabbed the jade bracelet on my neck. After I nodded, the spirit snake asked, "When we go to the canyon tomorrow, can I take you to a place?" I was surprised. "What's wrong with the spirit snake? Have you been here before?" The spirit snake's big head shook. "No, I haven't been here before. Are you kidding me? If you haven't been here before, why did you contact Tong Tong and ask me to come here?" I didn't say anything and was about to call Tong Tong to beat him up. The snake spirit was anxious and told me the reason. He said shyly, "I haven't been here before, but today I felt the aura of a friend. He's in that canyon." Friend. I was bewildered. The spirit snake continued, "Although we aren't humans with the spirits of all living things, we have souls and know how to reproduce. When I was alive, I was like you humans. I had a few wives and concubines. The aura in this canyon belongs to one of my concubines. It's been so many years. I didn't expect to meet her here." The spirit snake's explanation was an eye-opener for me. Snakes were lascivious by nature. Moreover, he was a 1,000-year-old snake demon. He had reached the flood dragon stage when he was alive. It wasn't impossible for him to have such a past. However, looking at the spirit snake's sneaky appearance, I felt that he wasn't telling me something. He wanted to do something behind my back. However, as long as Tong Tong was here, no matter what he wanted to do, I could just call Tong Tong and teach him a lesson. I guessed he wouldn't have any evil thoughts then. I nodded and agreed to his request. I asked him to contact me through Tong Tong when he arrived at the canyon tomorrow. When I returned to the campsite, the large bonfires had already been extinguished. Everyone had returned to their tents to sleep. Only 2 people from Fan Jichao's group had stayed behind to keep watch. I greeted them and returned to the single tent that they had reserved for me. At midnight, I heard a deep and mysterious voice. It sounded like some Buddhist scripture, but it was different. I couldn't describe it. It didn't seem to be a human language. I quietly opened a gap in the tent and listened carefully. It seemed to be coming from Director Lu's tent. After a long day of traveling, Director Lu wasn't sleeping. He was chanting something. It was really strange. During this trip to Shenangjia, Director Lu had been hiding something that I couldn't see through. At first, I wasn't too worried. However, we had just set off, and we had already experienced so many strange and dangerous things. Now, I was a little worried. However, it wasn't the time to retreat. I had to be more careful during the next part of the journey. It was a quiet night. Early the next morning, I was woken up by the cold. At midnight, I slept with the embers of the bonfire, so I didn't feel cold. However, in the morning, the temperature in the mountain had dropped to less than 10 degrees Celsius. Even though I was wrapped in a sleeping bag, I still felt cold. When I walked out of the tent, I saw that everyone was up. Bai Ling was arranging breakfast for the veterans. He looked refreshed. I guessed he had gotten over the fear from last night. The fatty foolishly followed behind Bai Ling. They looked like they were in love with each other. It seemed they were progressing fast. After breakfast, Director Liu energetically called for people to continue their journey. I purposely stared at Chief Liu for a long time. I noticed that his face was rosy, and he seemed to be in good spirits. I couldn't understand why he was so energetic today. Yesterday, he had been muttering in the tent, and I guessed he hadn't slept at all. I couldn't help but feel excited. Perhaps it was because we had experienced the terrifying events last night, but we had become bolder. When we set off to the decapitation gorge that old Zheng had mentioned, no one objected. On the way, I was also excited. This time, I had agreed to come with Director Liu because I wanted to visit more mountains and rivers to find good geomancy and dragon veins. This gorge had the best geomancy I had seen so far. If I wanted to find traces of a dragon vein, this gorge was the most likely place. I couldn't help but feel excited. However, as we got closer to the gorge, my excitement disappeared. I was puzzled. This gorge had good geomancy. It was obvious that it was a place to gather wind and gather energy. The yin and yang energies should be balanced. However, as we walked closer, I found that the yin energy in the gorge was really thick. The further we walked, the colder it became. I looked at the fatty and Zhao Yongquan. Their faces didn't look much better. However, we didn't rashly talk. Compared to the river that was full of corpses yesterday, this gorge was just a little thicker with yin energy. It wasn't a big deal. When we finally entered the gorge, I felt that something was wrong. The yin energy here was so thick that it made people shiver. Even when the red shadow touched me, I didn't feel this cold. Right at this moment, there was a turn in the front of the gorge. Before I could reach the place, I heard Fan Jichao, who was walking in the front. He had just turned around and screamed. However, his voice stopped halfway. It sounded really strange. Our faces turned serious and hurried to follow him. When we turned the corner and saw the scene in front of us, all of us opened our eyes wide. We couldn't help but scream. In the wide and long valley, a stream of people was lined up neatly and slowly moving forward. It looked like an army, but there were old and young people among them. Everyone seemed to be floating, and their faces were filled with incomparable empty expressions. Not a single sound could be heard as they moved forward. They weren't people. They were an army of ghosts. Chapter 61. The eyes of those ghosts weren't scary or malicious. They just calmly looked at us, empty and numb. Tang, Mingyang, Fan Jichao, and the others were scared out of their wits. They just stood there, not daring to move. Bai Ling paled. She couldn't help but pull the fat man's arm. Her voice trembled as she asked, What are those? The fat man didn't look good either. After a long moment, he said in a gloomy voice, They're ghosts. They're what we usually call ghosts. Bai Ling's face paled even more. She shrank into the fat man's body. Not only were Bai Ling and the other ordinary people scared, but Zhao Yongquan and I didn't look any better than them. We had seen ghosts before, and we knew that there would be ghosts nearby. However, we had never thought that there would be a whole canyon filled with ghosts. I lifted my head to look into the distance, and my scalp went numb. How many ghosts are there? 20,000, 50,000. There were so many people in the canyon that we couldn't even count them all. At first, those ghosts just calmly looked at us. However, gradually, they started to move. They didn't line up in front of us anymore. Instead, they slowly moved toward us. Their speed was slow, but soon the straight line disappeared. What replaced it was a huge group of ghosts that we couldn't see the end of. They slowly moved toward us. We shouldn't stay here for long. Zhao Yongquan reacted quickly. He waved his hand and said, "Everybody get out of this canyon." As soon as he said that, a stuttering voice came from behind us. "SS, there are some behind us too." We turned around and saw that it was true. We didn't know when, but a group of ghosts had gathered behind us. They looked at us with numb eyes and slowly walked toward us. The ones in the front were only a dozen meters away from us. Being attacked from both the front and the back, the frightened crowd panicked. Tang Mingyang's men took out their weapons from their backpacks and pointed at the ghosts in front of them to boost their courage. I hadn't seen them carry weapons before. Now I saw that Tang Mingyang, Fan Jichao, and the other leaders were holding guns. However, after taking out their weapons, their expressions did not change much. The bodies of these ghosts were blurry to begin with. Without even trying, they knew that guns would not be very effective against them. As the ghost approached, the gap between us became more and more hilarious. One of Tang Mingyang's subordinates couldn't stand it anymore. He pulled the trigger and shot a magazine of bullets. The result was the same as we had imagined. The bullets directly went through the ghosts' bodies, and they didn't do anything to us. The ghosts continued to walk toward us. Zhao Yongquan finally spoke. He first stopped Tang Mingyang's men from shooting, then turned to the fatty and me. "I'll guard the front. You two guard the back. Guard as long as you can." Even though I held a grudge against him, it was obvious that this wasn't the time to argue with him. I nodded in silence, called the fatty, and walked to the back. At this moment, Bai Ling was still holding the fatty's hand and didn't want to let go. The fatty hesitated for a while, then got rid of her hand and told her to be careful. Then he quietly followed me. When we were ready, the ghosts in the front and the back had forced us to a small, empty space that was around 40 to 50 square meters. Zhao Yongquan shouted, "Attack!" Then he read the mouse summoning incantation. He swung his steel sword and cut the first row of ghosts. The ghosts were as fragile as a piece of white paper in front of Zhao Yongquan's steel sword, which contained his Tao energy. The moment Zhao Yongquan's opponent appeared, I threw the yellow talisman I had prepared in my hand. I slowly accumulated these yellow talismans while practicing talisman making during my years in university. There are evil-breaking talismans, pure yang talismans, and so on. All of these talismans contain strong yang energy, and they have a miraculous effect on ghosts. Each talisman I threw out was like a grenade. They exploded the moment they touched the bodies of the ghosts, killing all the ghosts in the vicinity. When I took action, the fat man also took action. He threw the 3 shiny copper coins in his hand. They didn't look fast, but as soon as they touched the souls, they scattered them. After circling around the souls, the coins would automatically spin and fly back to him. It was a marvelous trick. I had to admit that these souls were really weak. After we took action, a large number of them were killed. However, as long as we killed one group, another group would come. When the yellow talismans in my hand were about to be used up, I lifted my head to look into the distance. The army of ghosts didn't seem to have an end in sight. The number of ghosts seemed to be more than I had expected. If we continue to consume our chi of the way endlessly, we will not be able to solve the problem. The chi of the way in our bodies is limited, while the number of dark souls is almost infinite. When we run out of chi of the way, we will not be able to save others. Should he call Tong Tong out? I started to think about this. facing such a large number of ghosts. Even if I called Tong Tong, I wasn't sure if he could swallow or drive them away. However, with Tong Tong here, I could guarantee that these ghosts wouldn't dare to attack us. While I was hesitating, Zhao Yongquan's voice came to me again. He asked everyone to retreat to the corner of the valley. There was a narrow call that was around 10 square meters wide. It was just big enough for all of us to hide in. After Chief Lu brought the ordinary people to hide, Zhao Yongquan, the fatty, and I also eliminated the ghosts in front of us while retreating. After we squeezed into the call, Zhao Yongquan swung his sword in a circle, dispersing all the ghosts in front of us. Then he quickly took out a small yellow paper figure and threw it on the ground. He chanted a mysterious spell, and the small figure, which was only as tall as a finger, quickly grew bigger. In the end, it became a giant that looked like a city wall, blocking the entrance of the colonel. This was a very advanced Dao technique. Although the yellow paper doll was just an illusion, it contained a supreme Dao Qi. If a ghost touched it, it would be destroyed. It would not be able to break through the yellow paper doll in a short amount of time. Finally, we were out of danger. Everybody heaved a sigh of relief. The fatty and I slumped to the ground and didn't want to move anymore. To be honest, when we were dealing with those ghosts, I didn't consume a lot of energy. I had to rely on the power of the talismans. Although I didn't consume a lot of energy, physically, I was mentally exhausted. Besides the thick yin energy on their bodies, those ghosts didn't have much attack power. However, their empty, numb eyes kept gazing at me, which gave me a lot of pressure. Although the ghosts were blocked outside, I still felt scared when I recalled those eyes. Although we had temporarily dodged a calamity, we all grimaced. The yellow paper giant could stop those ghosts for a while, but what would happen after that? No one spoke, but almost everyone's heart was filled with despair. There was no other way. If we wanted to escape, we could only rely on Tong Tong. I took out the jade bracelet. When I was about to call Tong Tong, the fatty, who wasn't far from me, angrily asked, "What are you doing?" I was stunned. Before I could turn around, I felt a cold sensation on my neck. An ice-cold sword was placed on my neck. Zhao Yongquan was the only one holding a long sword. I took a deep breath and suppressed my anger. I asked, "Taoist priest Zhao, what do you mean?" Zhao Yongquan coldly replied, "Nothing. I just want Mr. Zhou to lead the ghosts away. Then I'll take the others and run away from here." His voice was cold, without a trace of emotion. Before I could say anything, the fatty quickly walked to my side and said to Zhao Yongquan, "Martial Uncle Zhao, we can think of another way to escape. What you're doing is too much." Zhao Yongquan didn't move. He shook his head and said, "There's no other way." The fatty was silent. Zhao Yongquan and his master were friends. That was why he called him Martial Uncle Zhao. However, it was also because of this that he knew how strong Zhao Yongquan was. Now, Tong Tong said that it could store all the ghosts in front of me and still have room to spare. However, not long after I was happy, I thought of another problem. I asked Tong Tong, "If we want them to enter the jade bracelet, we have to get their permission." "I'm afraid." Tong Tong smiled and said, "There's no need. I have a way." In the past, Tong Tong only had the basic abilities of ghosts. But now that she had practiced the godhood technique, I didn't know what kind of abilities she had. It was the same as the last time when she could communicate with me without getting out of the jade bracelet. Tong Tong's abilities surprised me more and more. I exhaled in relief and took out the jade bracelet. I asked Tong Tong to find a way to store all the ghosts in there. Tong Tong received the jade bracelet. I didn't know what she was mumbling, but the jade bracelet glowed and the ghosts in front of us disappeared. After storing a batch of ghosts, Tong Tong walked forward and cast another spell. Another batch of ghosts disappeared. Then, the two of us walked out of the valley and collected the ghosts along the way. At first, I calculated the number, but later on, when the number reached tens of thousands, I was confused. I stopped counting and just followed Tong Tong. After walking for 1 hour, we finally reached the other exit of the canyon. We collected the last batch of ghosts into the jade bracelet. After collecting all the souls, Tong Tong's face was full of vigor. She didn't look tired at all. She handed the jade bracelet back to me. After receiving it, I thought for a while and told Tong Tong, since there are so many ghosts in the jade bracelet, when she cultivates here, she can swallow all of them to strengthen herself. Although Tong Tong was kind and had an instinctive resistance to swallowing other ghosts, Zhao Yongquan's words had touched me. He was right. He had forced me to come out because I was too weak. If I were stronger than him, he wouldn't have dared to threaten me. Tong Tong was a ghost child that everyone in the metaphysics world coveted. If she wasn't strong enough, someone like Professor Deng or Zhao Yongquan would appear. At that time, her life would be worse than death. After listening to me, Tong Tong hesitated. She pondered for a while, and then said with a pitiful face, "Brother, I'll listen to you, but there are good and bad ghosts. I'll only swallow the bad ones. Is that okay?" I smiled and rubbed her head. Of course. After collecting all the souls, I was thinking about whether I should go back or not. The snake spirit suddenly crawled out of the compass. It has sensed the aura of its concubine. She's not far from here. It wants me to take it there. Chapter 63. Humans were the spirits of all living beings. They were born with 3 souls. Even the most ordinary people were born with intelligence that other creatures did not have. They could be said to be favored by God. Other animals only had heavenly souls and earthly souls. Although they had some intelligence, they could only be regarded as stupid and ignorant compared to humans. Fortunately, all living beings had the desire to advance. Most animals with only 2 souls had a long lifespan that was difficult for humans to seek. After a long period of cultivation, these creatures also had the possibility of cultivating a natal soul under certain coincidences. As long as they cultivated a natal soul and completed the 3 souls, there was not much difference between these creatures and humans in other aspects, except for the difference in body shape. Moreover, it was rumored that some creatures with profound cultivation could even get rid of the shackles of their physical bodies after breaking through some barriers of heaven and earth. They could transform into humans and be no different from humans. Of course, this was something that only an extremely small number of living beings could achieve. Moreover, during this process, they had spent countless years and experienced endless suffering. When they took human form, they already possessed great power, and this was something that was very difficult for humans to possess. The snake spirit was a 1,000-year-old snake spirit when it was alive. Although it was still a long way from transforming into a human after cultivating a natal soul and completing the 3 souls, all of its behaviors were no different from humans. Moreover, creatures who embarked on the path of cultivation yearned for the life of humans. In ancient times, marrying wives and concubines was naturally not something too unimaginable. The snake spirit was very excited along the way. I could understand. After its death, it had been living in this magical compass for many years. Occasionally, it could recall its extraordinary years in the forest. Finally, it was lured out of the compass and met the pupil demon king. During this period of time, its life could only be described as pitiful. Now, it could finally see its old friend. It was not about being a wife or concubine, but it was an old friend who had seen its glory in the past. Humans were eager to find their place in the memories of others, and other creatures were no exception. The tiger that had fallen to the ground was definitely eager to see the little squirrel that had been submissive to it in the jungle. The snake spirit that was now trapped in the shallows was naturally eager to see the little concubine that had been clingy to it in the past. This was the same logic. The spirit snake led us to a rocky beach at the exit of the canyon. It flicked its thick tongue back and forth. It flicked twice to the left and twice to the right. Eventually, it confirmed a direction. Its giant body floated in the air. It opened its mouth and shouted, "Wee-wee, wee-wee, it's Brother Long. Where are you? Come out and see me." The spirit snake screamed many times in one breath, but nothing happened. I felt bored watching the show. Did you find the wrong place? Do you want to go somewhere else to look for it? I asked. The spirit snake shook its head at me, looking angry. This time, it cursed loudly. "Wee-wee, you little b***, TCH. Hurry up and come out for Brother Long. If you don't come out, when I find you, I'll teach you a lesson tonight." His sudden change in style had a miraculous effect. On the rocky beach in front of him, a black gas suddenly spurted out, and a small snake about the thickness of a thumb popped its head out from a crack in the rocks. It looked at the snake spirit in midair, and then with a whoosh, it turned into a white light that the naked eye couldn't see clearly and almost instantly rushed to the front of the snake spirit. Its two ruby-like snake eyes stared fixedly at the snake spirit, and after a long while, it let out a soft voice with a sobbing tone. "Brother Long, you heartless thing. Is it really you? I thought someone was pretending to be you. You bastard, it's been so many years. Where have you been?" Then, the little snake with a white body and red eyes slithered to the snake spirit's giant head. Its small body coiled around the snake spirit's head. However, the snake spirit's black head was just an illusion. The little snake's body directly pierced through its head. "Brother Long, why are you already dead?" The little white snake turned pale, with fright. It stared at the snake spirit for a while. Then its small body arched, and a large amount of black gas emitted from its back. It looked really scary. The snake spirit smiled cheekily. Its tongue was bigger than the little snake's body. It licked the little white snake's body and said in a mushy tone, "Little wee-wee, let's not talk about this. Why did you come here? Did anyone bully you while Brother Long wasn't here?" The little white snake ignored him and suddenly turned to look at me. It asked angrily, "Brother Long, did that human kill you? Looking at your current appearance, did he capture you to be his weapon spirit?" I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine as the little white snake's red eyes stared at me. It felt as if the surrounding temperature had dropped by a few degrees. This little white snake was much stronger than Zhao Yongquan. After being stared at by her, I didn't even have the slightest thought to resist. I only felt incomparably frightened. Fortunately, the snake spirit hurried to stop her. After explaining for a long time, the little white snake shifted her gaze away from me. Then she coquettishly told the snake spirit about what had happened to her all these years. According to her, after Brother Long had disappeared, she had searched everywhere but to no avail. Then a human Taoist priest had found her and chased after her. She had fled all the way here and had been hiding in this canyon for all these years. Then, the little white snake seemed to recall something. She hurriedly said, "The souls of the dead will come soon. The snake spirit should hide with her." When Tong Tong and I had collected the souls, the snake spirit had been in the compass. It didn't know what was going on. It asked the little white snake, "What souls of the dead are you talking about?" The snake spirit stuck out its tongue disdainfully when it learned that it was just a bunch of human souls. "Aren't they just ghosts? They're very nutritious. What's there to be afraid of? I can eat 100 of them." The little snake's face didn't look relaxed at all. Instead, it said with fear, "They are ghosts, but it's not just 100. There are at least 100,000 of them." The snake spirit was so scared that it almost fell from the sky. It grinned and said, "What? 100,000? The little white snake nodded. The fear on its face didn't disappear. Then it said, "The reason why I've been hiding here all these years is because of these ghosts. Every day, I would secretly catch some to eat. This has been going on for more than 100 years. But no matter how much I eat, the ghosts still fill the entire canyon. I can't see the end of them." The snake spirit's huge head revealed a human-like fear. It looked around and shook its head. "How could there be so many ghosts? I don't believe it." The little white snake was a little anxious. She shook her tail, and black gas gushed out of her body. On her originally smooth head, there were 2 blood-red sarcomas. Then she said, "Brother Long, look, that year I had just cultivated my natal soul. Now look at me." Before she could finish her sentence, the snake spirit looked as if it had seen a ghost. It stared at her head in horror and said, "You're going to transform into a flood dragon or 2 horns. It's only been 100 years. How could it be?" The little white snake nodded and excitedly said, "It's because I've eaten ghosts for more than 100 years. Now, do you believe me? Those ghosts are weak, but there are too many of them. We should hurry and hide." This time, the snake spirit didn't say anything else. However, it pointed at me and said, "I'm your friend. You should take me and hide with you." At first, I wanted to tell them that there were no more ghosts. However, after hearing the little white snake say that it wanted to take us to hide, I was a little curious. Why would it take a living person like me to hide in this rocky area? The little white snake asked us to follow her. After a few steps, the little white snake's body suddenly surged with black gas, directly covering me and the snake spirit. Then my vision turned black. When I could see again, I found myself in a huge, simple, and crude cave. I looked around with interest. Just now, when the black air wrapped around my body, I felt a fluctuation similar to that of a feng shui formation. The little white snake unexpectedly had the ability to arrange formations. Hidden in the middle of this rocky beach was a big cave. After entering the cave, the little white snake took the snake spirit to another cave, leaving me here alone. The snake spirit couldn't leave the compass too far, but I didn't mind it. I sat there and slowly considered if I should meet up with the fatty and the others. I stayed here for more than half an hour. Then the snake spirit and the little white snake reappeared. The little white snake stayed far away from me and didn't come over. The snake spirit swaggered in front of me. I felt strange. Recently, the snake spirit had been as obedient as a grandchild in front of me. Why did it suddenly return to its previous arrogant manner? Before I could figure it out, the spirit snake ran to me and said proudly, "Kiddo, do you see anything different about your Uncle Snake, Immortal?" I focused my eyes and saw that the remaining energy in the snake spirit's body had disappeared. It had become a pure snake spirit. I guess the white snake spirit had used some tricks. Before I could say anything, the snake spirit laughed and said, "All right, hand over the compass to me and release that little girl. Let this Uncle Snake, Immortal, beat her up. Then I'll let you go." "Beat Tong Tong? Are you sure?" I looked at the snake spirit and didn't understand. Chapter 64. After the spirit snake said that, the little white snake, Hui Hui, also came over. Her cold snake eyes stared at me and said, "Lowly human, you dare to bully my husband. Don't even think about getting out of here today." Although the little white snake was small, her murderous aura was really terrifying. I didn't need to fight to know that I wasn't her opponent. From her expression, I was afraid that she really wanted to kill me. Before I could say anything, the spirit snake awkwardly moved between me and the little white snake. He grinned at the little white snake and said, "Actually, you didn't bully me. Just beat him up and teach him a lesson. Why do you want to keep him here? He's just wasting our time tonight." His mischievous face angered the little white snake. She glared at him, then turned to me and snorted, "Hurry up and hand over the ghost girl that my husband mentioned. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. Yeah, hurry up and call her out. Otherwise, I won't be polite." The spirit snake rubbed his palms and looked like a fox exploiting the tiger's might. This fellow seemed to be born with the attribute of seeking death. I looked at his despicable appearance and tried to save him one last time. "Are you sure? I'm really going to call her. Stop talking nonsense. Hurry up." The spirit snake slapped his tail on the ground and glared at me. Fine, I couldn't stop those who seek death. I pouted my lips and took out the jade bracelet to call Tong Tong out. As soon as she came out, she saw the spirit snake. She giggled and said, "Hey, little snake, you're here too. Did you find your friend?" After she said that, she turned around and saw the little white snake on the side. Her eyes instantly narrowed into a line. She pointed at the little white snake and said to me happily, "Big brother, look, this little white snake is so cute." Seeing Tong Tong, the originally arrogant snake's spirit subconsciously shrank back, but when it turned back to look at the little white snake, its courage rose again. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it said to Tong Tong, "Little ghost girl, old, let me tell you, Lord Snake Immortal, this Snake Immortal no longer has any baleful inchi on my body. Come over obediently and let me beat you up. Then we can forget about our past grievances. Otherwise," before he finished speaking, the little white snake probably could not stand it anymore. With a whoosh, it flew in front of Tong Tong and angrily said, "You are just a little ghost that is not even a Een spirit. How dare you take advantage of my husband when he is in trouble to humiliate him? You bitch, kneel down." After listening to her, Tong Tong turned to look at me in confusion. She sounded wronged and said, "Brother, this little white snake is so fierce." I fanned the flames on the side. Actually, little white snake sis isn't fierce. It's mainly because little snake is bewitching her. If she doesn't get beaten up, she won't be obedient. Tong Tong agreed with my words. His little hand moved. It seemed he was about to hit the spirit snake again. At this moment, the spirit snake panicked. Then he became strangely angry. "Why? You want to hit me? Now that my hui hui is here, it's time for me to hit you." "No, it's time to hit both of you." The little white snake also chimed in. "You lowly maid, stand there and don't move. Let my husband vent his anger. If you dare to move, I'll swallow you." As she said that, the spirit snake's giant tail swept toward Tong Tong. Tong Tong was as willful as before. She didn't want to spoil the spirit snake. She grabbed her tail and threw him to the ground. After getting up, the spirit snake's mouth was crooked in anger. He couldn't even speak properly. He shivered and said, You dared to throw me. I'm so angry." Who knew that Tong Tong was even angrier than him? She pouted and said, "I told you that if you say dirty words again, I'll continue to hit you. You dared to say it again." At this moment, the little white snake couldn't hold back anymore. She dashed toward us. The spirit snake didn't stop her. He directly said to the little white snake, "Hui hui, let's attack together. Hit them both." Although he said that, he didn't dare to make a move. He just hid behind us. However, the little white snake wasn't careless. She slightly opened her mouth, revealing a bright red color. Black smoke surged from her body. It seemed she wanted to swallow us in one bite. Although I didn't know how the little white snake could swallow us both, I felt a great danger. I hurried to give the jade bracelet to Tong Tong and shouted, "Tong Tong, release the ghosts." No matter if it was Tong Tong or I, we weren't the little white snake's opponent. However, all the ghosts in the canyon were in the jade bracelet. From the little white snake's expression when she talked about the ghosts, I could tell that she was also afraid of them. Tong Tong didn't say anything. She followed my order and released the ghosts in the jade bracelet. In just a blink of an eye, countless ghosts filled the entire cave, surrounding us. On my side, the ghosts around us were afraid of Tong Tong. They tried to hide behind us. However, the spirit snake was different. Countless ghosts gazed at them with numb and empty eyes. They slowly but resolutely stormed toward them. The spirit snake was scared to death. It shivered and couldn't speak. The little white snake's complexion wasn't any better. It looked at us in shock and asked, "There are so many ghosts. Did you capture all of them?" Tong Tong waved the jade bracelet in her hand. Her eyes curved into a smile. Yeah, little white snake's expression was still okay, just shocked and stunned. But the snake spirit next to her was full of despair when she heard this. Her body fell directly from midair to the ground, paralyzed there, motionless. Her eyes became almost as empty and numb as the surrounding ghosts. She would probably never forget the fear of being dominated by the pupil demon king for the rest of her life. Tong Tong hopped over, reached out, and patted the head of the snake spirit, and comforted him. "Don't be afraid. These ghosts listen to me. As long as you don't swear in the future and behave yourself, I won't let them bully you." The spirit snake looked numb. It seemed she didn't hear Tong Tong. After a while, she slowly got up. She turned to the little white snake and said, "Hui Hui, I was wrong. I shouldn't have come to find you. I'm afraid I've implicated you. It's all my fault." Then he didn't wait for the little white snake to reply. He walked to me with a weary face and returned to the compass. The little white snake turned to look at the ghosts around. She was a little reluctant. "Where do you want to take my husband?" I raised my hand and waved the compass. The spirit snake is the treasure spirit of this compass. He can't leave this compass. I'll let him slowly cultivate inside the compass. If he has a chance to turn into a flood dragon, he might be able to reconstruct his body. The little white snake stared at me. She kept silent for a long time. Then she angrily warned me. Although she can't fight against so many ghosts, if I dare to harm the spirit snake, she will find a chance to swallow me. Although she threatened me, she just cared about the spirit snake. I didn't hate her and just nodded at her. Tong Tong seemed to like the little white snake a lot. With a sincere face, he asked the little white snake, "Do you want to go with us? That way, you can stay with the spirit snake." Unfortunately, the little white snake was very vigilant against us. She was scared and resentful of Tong Tong. She didn't even bother with Tong Tong. She directly broke the formation of the cave and sent us outside. After we left, I told the little white snake, "If I have time, I will bring the spirit snake to see you again." Moreover, I gave her my house address. If she has time, she can go there to see the spirit snake. After bidding farewell to the little white snake, I started to think about where I should go next. Since I had stayed in the little white snake's cave for a long time, I wasn't sure where the fatty and the others had gone. However, after they found that the ghosts in the ravine had disappeared, they would leave as fast as they could. They wouldn't stay there for long. After thinking for a while, I decided to return to the ravine. If I could meet Chief Lu and the others, I would meet them. If I couldn't, I would just return the way I had come. I had encountered many dangers along the way, and I didn't know what would happen if I kept going. Although I wasn't scared, I was worried about the road ahead. I thought that I wouldn't have a chance to meet them. However, when I reached the valley where I had parted with them, I saw that they were still there. Chapter 65. When I returned to the canyon, I was prepared to leave in advance. However, they were still waiting for me there. It seemed they were waiting for me. Since we met again, I had no choice but to go there. When he saw me, Chief Lu looked excited. "What happened after you led the ghosts away?" Zhao Yongquan was sitting not far from Chief Lu. He was looking at me, with a frightened face, but now he closed his eyes, his face calm. I looked at him and found an excuse to deal with Director Lu. "Why are you still here?" I asked him. Chief Lu told me. After the ghost left, they wanted to leave this place immediately. However, the fatty insisted on finding me. They sent people to search around, but they couldn't find the ghost. They decided to give the fatty some time to find me. After he said that, I recognized that the fatty wasn't in the crowd. Since I was worried that the fatty would run into some trouble, I asked Chief Lu to send Tang Mingyang's men to find him. Around half an hour later, the fatty ran back from outside, sweating profusely. As soon as he saw me, he rushed forward and hugged me. Then he looked me up and down, left and right. He was puzzled. "Why did you come back without any problems?" Chief Lu and the others were ordinary people. When they saw so many ghosts, they were at most frightened. In reality, they didn't know how scary those ghosts were. Only me, the fatty, and Zhao Yongquan knew what would happen after being submerged in so many ghosts. That was why Chief Lu was happy to see me. He didn't think much about it, but the fatty was puzzled. Of course, I couldn't tell him about the jade bracelet and Tong Tong. I could only say that I didn't know. Not long after I got out of the canyon, the ghosts scattered. That was how I managed to escape. After exchanging greetings, Chief Lu urged us to continue our journey. We headed deeper into the canyon. Although encountering so many spirits in this canyon was unimaginable, in reality, it was just a daunting experience. No one was injured or killed, and it was much better than yesterday when they crossed the river. Therefore, no one gave up. Everyone regrouped and continued on their journey. On the way here, I didn't pay attention to the geomancy of this canyon because I wanted to collect the souls. This time, I had nothing to do, so I used the dragon-seeking and observing aura technique to find the location of the dragon vein from the terrain on both sides of the canyon. Dragon veins were easy to find in the terrain of the canyon. Soon I found a clue. On the right side of the mountain ridge, I vaguely found a vein with the aura of a dragon vein. Although the aura of this dragon's vein was very shallow and wasn't considered very good among normal dragon's veins, what surprised me was that this dragon's vein had an embryonic aura. As for the embryonic breathing realm, it was the difference between an ordinary dragon vein and a true dragon vein. Although true dragon veins were not embryonic dragon veins, as long as they were bought by a true dragon, they would definitely have embryonic dragon veins. When I first saw the terrain of this canyon, I could only guess that there was a dragon vein, but I didn't have any illusions about a true dragon vein. Many geomancy masters couldn't find a true dragon vein in their entire lives. I didn't dare to hope that I could find one during my first time observing the dragon, but now it seemed that everything was destined. Perhaps I would have such a lucky chance. After seeing the embryonic dragon vein, I felt that this trip was worth it. Whether or not we could find the true dragon vein through this embryonic dragon vein, it was even more unbelievable than my best wish when I had agreed to join this trip with Chief Lu. Generally speaking, the mountain range that contained the true dragon vein wasn't very tall, but it was very long. This was a place where the embryonic dragon vein had just been found. Behind it, there would be endless veins. The embryonic dragon vein was just a sign. Whether there was a true dragon vein or not, we had to see the ancestral dragon's branches. Although I was anxious to get to the front to see if there was a true dragon vein, The process of observing the dragon would be very beneficial to geomancy masters. I suppressed my impatience and deliberately slowed down to observe each vein of the dragon vein. This embryonic breath dragon vein might not be able to nurture a true dragon vein, but after observing it, my understanding of the embryonic breath dragon vein has deepened. If I have the opportunity to encounter another embryonic breath dragon vein in the future, I will have greater confidence in nurturing a true dragon vein. Since I had slowed down, I gradually left the team and walked to the back. The team in front of us stopped to wait for me once. When I caught up with them, Chief Lu came back to ask me about it. However, when I told him that I wanted to observe the terrain, he didn't say much. He just told me not to stray too far from the team. While Chief Lu was talking to me, Zhao Yongquan turned his head and looked at me. His eyes didn't have the disdain he had at the beginning. Vaguely, he was afraid of me. Compared to his fear towards me, I was even more vigilant towards him. Although Tong Tong had kept the spirits in his jade bracelet and could release them at the critical moment to defend against the enemy, the spirits didn't listen to my and Tong Tong's commands. This method could only frighten the enemy or trap them. It was impossible to take their lives. Moreover, this method had another limitation. If Zhao Yongquan wanted to kill me and ambush me, I wouldn't have a chance to release the souls. I wouldn't have the ability to resist him. After they were far away, I looked at Zhao Yongquan's back and became more vigilant. Along the way, I slowly observed the terrain of the mountain and the dragon vein